Okay, let's get going. The welcome to the second day of our DDES MBUS reviews. We are going to kick off with Aya Riad, who is presenting her thesis defense today. Welcome, Aya.
Thank you, Neil.
Who's flown in from Abu Dhabi. Great to see you, Aya. Okay.
Thank you, Neil.
Get going.
All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. So today I will be presenting my dissertation titled Simulated Empathic Ecologies, a framework towards effectively attuned environments.
Okay, wait a second.
Sorry, yeah.
Can everyone hear that? Sorry, just want to check.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you, Biana. All right. So I would actually like to start with kind of a look back, which was in a way a launchpad to the motivation behind this dissertation, which is my research work at the DRL at the AA titled SlinkyBot, which basically looked at behavioral systems that were based on self-assembly and self-structuring in a way to kind of reimagine some kind of an add-on system into an environment or into a house that would basically give it some sense of flexibility and adaptability, and in a way converge with the human life cycle as its own kind of life cycle itself, basically tailoring to the human's needs, but also kind of going through its own behavioral cycles. Now, the reason I kind of bring that up is that in a way, this research kind of opened up many domains for me at that time, which focused on responsive environments and behavioral complexity in such robotic systems. But in a way, as we approached kind of the end of the masters, something that was kind of quite apparent to me is that in a lot of our design approach and in our systems, the human was merely a physical proxy. Basically, there was almost no consideration of kind of the complexity of the human presence and what makes us really human with all of the kind of like internal affective landscapes. So that question was lingering with me, and even beyond my master's work, as I engaged in other collaborative work through Shift Space, looking also into interactive environments, the human was still kind of seen as this placeholder, as this abstract, reduced, reductive proxy that was that was merely looked at as a physical entity in terms of its presence and the basically the occupancy it serves. So that kind of these kind of questions kind of lingered with me to why we are just considering the human within these responsive environments as simply this kind of silhouette of a physical boundary. And that led to the motivation behind the work that I've been doing through this DDES, Simulated Empathic Ecologies, which in a way situates itself amongst multiplicity of disciplines, including affective computing, HCI, responsive design and environment, and psychophysiology, as well as cognitive psychology. So in a way, simulated empathic ecologies is kind of seeking to recalibrate and rethink the relationship between humans and their environment. And it envisions the space as a companion to the human, but one that is attuned to the subtle nuances of their emotions. And at the heart of it, it also shifts the notion of agency, that it's no longer confined to the human actors, but it also now extends to the built environment itself. And in a way, it kind of urges us to consider the built environment as an extension of our collective psyche and its potential as a medium and also as a mediator of human engagement and interaction. So in a way, I was looking to kind of synthesize a framework that would lead to kind of considering creating environments that resonate with the full spectrum of the human experience, the physical, the emotional, and the social. So the objectives for this dissertation, or the approach to kind of synthesize such a framework, happened in three folds. The first one was basically an analytical understanding of the current interactive design approaches within spatial design context, and redefining the interactive design frameworks and vocabularies to embed an effective dimension. So in a way, there's kind of like no reinvention of the wheel here. It's my approach to this was more of kind of adopting and re-articulating and synthesizing existing methodologies and approaches within interactive design, as well as looking at adopting and reappropriating methodologies from affective computing, which have been kind of really escalating in multiple of fields, such as neuroscience, obviously, psychology, but as well as gaming and virtual reality, neuromarketing, and autonomous vehicles, and kind of the advancements that's been happening with affective computing in these domains far supersedes any kind of architectural or spatial design kind of integration. So kind of learning from these disciplines that have been pushing this domain further, and looking at the methodologies that were used, and trying to integrate it within spatial design thinking. We basically takes me to the third objective, which is to propose a formulated set of principles and a framework that reconciles the differing methodologies, terminologies, and approaches of interactive design and effective computing into a unified framework. And basically, this synthesis kind of looks into harmonizing the emotional richness of effective computing with the experiential richness of interactive design, and looking into creating empathetic spatial design systems. So
Oh,
kind of,
find my class.
no, it's all right. So yeah, so questions basically that kind of arise from these approaches or objectives is, what kind of framework could unify these disciplines, and what might such a system influence the social interactions and psychological experiences of its occupants, as well as what approaches to interactive design kind of could afford certain effectiveness to be integrated within it, and most certainly what effective computing methodologies would kind of be able to interlace with spatial design thinking. It's important for me to clarify before I kind of go deeper into this that I do not intend to kind of propose a new definition of emotion or emotional theory, as well as in terms of the ethical privacy issues related to effective computing or AI in general. Obviously extremely important, would probably need a whole kind of doctorate on its own, but just not the specific scope or focus of this particular dissertation. So my dissertation is structured in two parts. The first part is the conceptual landscape of simulated empathic ecologies, which basically walks us through the kind of the foundation and interweaving the different theoretical and philosophical perspectives that kind of leads us to a conceptualization or thinking of simulated empathic ecologies. The second part focuses on the framework, and basically it kind of has three different elements: the interactional approach, the different principles of C, as well as utilizing the effective loop as a design workflow. So starting with the conceptual landscape, and basically the conceptual landscape was basically a way for me to kind of organize the different layers that definitely influence and is a very important kind of foundation to these kind of effectively attuned environments that I'm talking about. And there are layers that are definitely interconnected and seep into one another. So it was more of my kind of just approach to kind of work through them in a trajectory to kind of digest the the terrain that is foundational to see. So the first layer basically, which is the sediments of stillness, and again, this is kind of a way to just see within architectural thinking, architectural theory, and the different philosophies out there, and not to kind of start speaking about it in a vacuum. So, so yeah, sediments of stillness, starting off with the basically design strategies that were kind of have been largely occupied with the production of static and finalized forms, kind of the more traditional kind of way of architectural thinking that was very kind of formalized and focused on the finalized form before even the occupancy is kind of enters the house or the space. So such a perspective basically framing architecture as this discipline concerned primarily with like utility, with little regard for the intangible aspects of human experience. This was obviously kind of spoken about from the lens of Marcus Vitruvius, which he articulated in the Architectura during the first century, basically about, you know, utility, firmness, and beauty, and how this was kind of like the framework that some architects kind of saw as a lens to providing practicality, structural stability, and aesthetic harmony in this design of spaces. Moving forward, kind of breaking into these sediments, we go into the 1960s and 1970s avant-garde contributions that really laid a lot of groundwork for kind of the fluid thinking of architecture. Architects began to conceptualize spaces not as just static objects, but as dynamic and relational systems, and ones that are in continual flux, and basically kind of disregarding this traditional Vitruvian ideals. So it was a period of definitely profound cultural and technological transformation driven by advances in media, information technology, and systems thinking. In this context, Hans Hollein, in his provocative manifesto, Everything's Architecture, kind of emerged as a radical challenge to architecture's conventional boundaries. Published in 1968, Hollins basically declared or posited architecture that it should extend beyond the physical building to encompass the entirety of human existence, mediating relationships between individuals, society, and technology. So we start basically seeing this kind of like breaking of this kind of static and almost inert type of architectural thinking. Now, obviously, we cannot kind of speak about the 60s and 70s architecture thinking without mentioning Frederick Keisler, and this quote here that says, "I'm not building a house, but a way of living. Architecture must cease to be a static object and instead become an experience that evolves with its inhabitants." And this is basically a picture of his endless house, which again was more about kind of an approach of thinking about the fluidity of spaces and how to dissolve the boundaries of rigid environments. Keisler also basically coined the term Coriolism, which basically offered a conceptual lens for this fluid and interconnected reality. And here in this diagram, man equals heredity and environment. Basically, he was trying to express the continual interaction of both the total environment on man and the continual interaction of its constituent parts on one another. So in a way, again, this kind of Coriolism philosophy by Keisler really reveals this profound potential of interactivity of fluids thinking in spaces to kind of redefine the human environment relationship. Kind of on a similar wavelength with Archigram, another leading force in this kind of experimental architectural thinking and movement, also sought to break free from this stasis of modernism. And in this project here, the Walking City kind of reimagined architecture as this mobile and self-regulating entity, and it envisioned this structure that could migrate in response to shifting environmental and social conditions. Again, redefining architecture's relationship to permanence and to place. So, in many ways, kind of reflecting on these projects and these approaches, we see that there's kind of like a breakaway from the harsh, rigid, permanent environment to one that is more flexible, to one that it could potentially respond to different varying conditions. And that's most certainly a kind of a solid foundation for the thinking of my framework. Moving on to the next layer, which is feedback fields. And in feedback fields, basically, I start kind of digging deeper into the emergence of cybernetics in the mid-20th, which provided a kind of a real instrumental shift. And basically with cybernetics being the science of control and communication in the animal and in the machine, as Norbert Weiner defined. Basically kind of looking at systems as this kind of input-output control ones. But the aspect that I really want to highlight here is actually past conversation theory, which is considered as a second-order cybernetics building upon the foundation of the first order of cybernetics, which offered a more nuanced understanding of systems. Past conversation theory basically delved into the mechanisms through which participants can be in dialogue to co-construct knowledge and framing communication as this dynamic process. Now, in this picture you see here, which is of the project Fun Palace by Cedric Price and Joanne Littlewood. So Cedric Price and Joanne Littlewood were actually quite kind of transformative figures. They kind of looked at architecture from this cybernetic theory lens, obviously with the help of Gordon Pask collaborating with them, and basically reimagined architecture as this dynamic, mutable framework for interaction, and again rejecting this notion of permanence. So in a way, Fun Palace. It's all right. So in a way, Fun Palace embodied this experimental ethos, proposing a model for the built environment as this evolving and adaptive system, and not one of a static artifact, but one that is could be a catalyst for human engagement. I'm kind of like gliding through the layers a little bit here. I go into a little bit more depth in the dissertation, but I do want to get to kind of the heart of the matter here. But it's extremely instrumental to mention these important figures and thinking perspectives. So with soft substrum, in kind of digging into that layer, I actually go into talking about softness in terms of kind of material pliability, and as well as the concept of softness in terms of fluid thinking. So here in the Soft Architecture Machines book by Nicholas Negroponte, he really articulated this kind of softness as this fluid dialogue between human and machines, and how do we basically go about to designing our spaces and our interaction with the machines that help us create these spaces. And he basically kind of really concludes the book with this idea about man will be living in an intelligent machine and this kind of physical cognitive environment that can immediately respond to our needs and whims. So again, kind of basing a lot of the thinking within the framework on these foundational thinkers here. Digging into the next layer of mimetic morphogenesis, which really goes into kind of the influence of nature on design thinking and on material behavior and on system behavior in general. Here we have the example of the project by Neri Oxman, the Silk Pavilion. And as Neri Oxman said, as in nature, when creation begins with matter, morphogenesis, or the generation of form, is a process engendered by the physical forces of nature. So in this pavilion, the silkworm's natural spinning behavior was used as kind of a form of biological computation. So in a way, we see architectural thinking not just kind of being influenced by kind of the systematic thinking of cybernetics, but also by actual natural or behavior from nature and materiality that is also influenced by various biomimicry thinking. This layer also builds up to speak about the petting zoo from minima forms and talks about, again, biomimicry kind of influences in terms of the behavioral complexity it could embody in a system or showcase in a system. Here, petting zoo by minima forms, it offers this robotic environment that explores adaptation and showcases these artificial creatures that progressively refine their behavior through interaction with participants. And basically also fostering some sort of curiosity and play while creating these intimate, evolving exchanges between the human and their surrounding. So that takes us to kind of the final layer of the conceptual landscape. And it was important for me to kind of set the scene to this point, which basically kind of takes us to our spaces being these almost like machines and computational interfaces that we expect some sort of kind of responsiveness from or desire some sort of responsiveness from. And the affective atmospheres layer is really when I start talking about affect and the kind of the potential influence of taking emotion into consideration. And here we have a quote by Marvin Minsky. The question is not whether intelligent machines can have any emotions, but whether machines can be intelligent without emotions. And his book, The Society of Mind. So here it's kind of like taking the kind of the angle from if our architecture is continuously kind of gaining intelligence through material behavior and other system kind of embedded intelligence. You know, what are the different ways that we can also like think about it in terms of that kind of embedded intelligence? Does it need to have effective kind of capabilities or effective recognition capabilities for it to be truly intelligent? And basically, I will kind of go through some different perspectives when it comes to this kind of effective integration. So quite a vital and the person who actually coined the term effective computing, Rosalind Pickard from MIT Media Lab. So Rosalind Pickard basically wrote this very influential book titled Effective Computing to kind of really shed the light on how emotions are becoming, according to her, an active part of intelligence, especially in perception, rational thinking, decision-making, planning, creativity, and so on. So to Rosalind Pickard, it wasn't just some kind of a luxury or something that it was unnecessary or unlinked to intelligent behavior to kind of dismiss. To her, effectiveness and emotions were vital to intelligence and specifically to interfaces that require some sort of social interaction with the humans. And to the point that psychologists and educators and so on were basically redefining the term or the definition of intelligence to include some basically reference to emotional intelligence and social skills as well. So basically, her perspective is that computers do not need effective abilities for the fanciful goal of becoming humanoids. They need them to have basically function with a more kind of sensitive, attuned intelligence toward humans in their interactions. And Rosalind Picard was also heavily influenced by Antonio Damasius' Descartes' Error book. And basically, the human mind has always been kind of framed as this dual structure, reason and emotion, and kind of reflecting this Cartesian split between body and mind. And Antonio Damasius' book kind of really disrupted that in terms of drawing of, that's right, where basically he positions emotion not as an obstruction to rationality, but as an essential component of it. So Damasio basically draws from this groundbreaking concept he terms, excuse me, somatic markers, which he identifies psychological cues like gut feelings, things that basically shape our judgments, things that kind of give different kinds of values to our decision making. And he basically found it to be profound to this kind of decision making process. In a lot of his kind of clinical research, he observed different patients that had certain damage to their frontal lobes and regions that are critical for emotional processing. And although these patients kind of in logical testing performed with really high capabilities, when it came to kind of decision making or in day-to-day interactions with colleagues, they found it very difficult to kind of be able to associate this kind of value of towards their decision making, and basically, as Damasio mentioned, that one of his patients' reasoning was profoundly impaired because it had been deprived of this guidance that emotion normally provides. Another kind of important book here, The Media Equation, how people treat computers, television, and new media like real people and places. And in this book, Byron Reeves and Clifford Nass also kind of revealed this idea from what observations from what they have noticed in multiple testing is that human beings are consistently projecting these social behaviors onto machines and engaging with computers and media as though they are human. And in a way, their thought-provoking studies kind of really revealed that these interactions between human and computer retained core traits of face-to-face exchanges. And so they situated affect as basically a signal of understanding, a layer of nuance that conveys the success of an interaction, and that it is essential for humans to have this kind of like almost like reassurance that they have been heard or that their interaction kind of has been successful, and that people seek this confirmation to as a way to kind of evaluate the success of an interaction. So now when we talk about emotions, there are multiple theories of emotions that really kind of go on to the debate between is it kind of something that emerges from as a cognitive result, or is it a physiological one, or is it a mix of both? So in a way, these theories of emotions have diverged into kind of these two primary schools of thought, which is the physiological basis and the one that is based on a cognitive appraisal and interpretation. But what they kind of where they come together, I think, is that emotion is not kind of is not merely just an experience felt by the individual. It's a collection of visceral reactions of the body and also the interpretation and appraisal of the mind. So in many ways, I kind of dug deeper into these different kinds of theories of emotion, from the discrete emotion theories, which basically look at emotions as biological universals. And we have Charles Darwin, Paul Ekman's basic emotion theory, which kind of lay out very discrete set of emotions that are universally kind of common between everyone. Whereas we have James Russell and Albert Mehrabian kind of looking at emotion as more of a dimensional kind of spectrum, which focuses on valence and arousal and kind of the intensity of these instead. Now, these theories of emotion obviously is essential in in affective computing and in the way affective computing methodologies are really kind of build upon. And I will be going a little bit into that moving forward. So now we go to basically the kind of the second part of my dissertation, which really looks at the kind of systematic framework approach to simulated empathic ecologies. And the first aspect of it looks at how can affect be basically an interactional approach. And what I mean by that is that the role of the design here is not to kind of impose a singular definitive account of a user's emotional state or to reduce it to just the physiological and computational traces. The approach within the C framework kind of looks at it as more of a co-creation and an engagement between the user or the occupant of the space and the system around it and the environment that basically enables the user to engage with their emotions reflectively. And also it has agency in kind of the process of this meaning making of their own effect and that is basically embedded in their lived experience every day. So it kind of reframes the kind of the more instrumental or informational approach that a lot of affective computing methodologies heavily relies on. And it's not in a way to replace that. The informational approach is definitely necessary in terms of recognizing and inferring emotional states. But within kind of the C environments, I see that as a kind of uh, a merge between the informational approach and as well as the interactional approach, which also gives the kind of the occupant more agency to engage in this kind of emotion meaning making with the environment. So basically, to kind of put it into the points here. So affect in an interactional approach is recognized as arising from the interplay of both of all the social, corporeal, and cultural dimensions. And it also privileges interpretive flexibility. So it allows for multiple interpretation of states. It's not necessarily about the accurate or precise prediction of one's affective state, but rather kind of almost like an impression or a cue to the kind of the psychological condition of the occupant and in a way in dialogue with them to kind of make meaning of that. And it also aims to expand the communicative repertoire, enabling a broader spectrum of spatial affective expressiveness. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that. But basically, it looks into the way that the environments respond to these different kind of affective states are also quite open and flexible, and also in a way can be kind of tuned or dialed by the occupant as well. It aims to foreground the user's active role in making sense of their emotions, shifting the emphasis from a purely system-driven analysis to a more user-centered reflection. So now I go into the principles of C, which focuses on 4 core ones, which is perceptual empathy, affective expressiveness, adaptive empathic intelligence, and sociocultural resonance. With perceptual empathy, basically it's threefold, which is affective recognition, multimodal integration, and contextual attunement. And I'm going to go a bit deeper into that. Now, with affective recognition, that could basically that could happen in multiple of ways. That includes facial expression recognition, body expression recognition, vocal expression, ECG, GSR, EEG, and I would like to go kind of just a little bit into some of them through some design precedents that have attempted to integrate affective data into their design process and projects. So here we have a project called Mesolite by Benaz Farahi. Benaz Farahi has been kind of really looking into this domain of interfacing affective data with different kind of responsive artifacts and fashion. Here with this Mesolite project, it's a display that is responsive to the user's facial expression, and this was actually in collaboration with Adidas as a kind of a product display that always tries to capture the onlooker's attention and kind of try to reflect upon their expression and their kind of inferred state. Another present here, The Heart Library by George Hood, basically looks into integrating ECG data into this interactive kind of projection that looks into basically having this immersive visualization that responds directly to the heart rate and translating these silent modulations into some dynamic shift in colors and motion that is projected into the space. And basically kind of as participants consciously influence their physiological responses and by extension, their visual and auditory experience of their space, this kind of project has been collecting kind of like almost an archive of these participants' experiences as a living testament to the body as more than just a biological machine, but as a site of memory and imagination and feeling. With this project here, Desk Prosthesis by Katerina Richter, which is a part of a series of artifacts and augmentation to furniture that Katerina worked on, showcases an example of GSR, which is galvanic skin response, and how galvanic skin responses basically measuring kind of the skin kind of sweat conductance could be as a way to kind of affect different responses in artifacts of a space or in our spaces in general. So with this project, she actually kind of explores the potential of olfactory stimuli as a subtle and effective therapeutic intervention. So with this kind of heated pad, it basically responds to the different GSR intensity and releases these different scents according to the intensity of the GSR to either kind of have a calming effect or a more kind of activating effect. So looking into these kind of aromas to influence the experience of the immediate space. And here we have Cerebral Hut by Ozell. And with Cerebral Hut, it kind of reimagines a space that could integrate EEG into its dynamism and responsiveness. So in a way here, I'm because my concern is not really kind of in the particular responses or interactions, nor is it kind of proposing a particular design language. It's merely just to kind of showcase some precedents that have been integrating affective data. Now, something that I could basically kind of reflect upon looking into these case studies is that a lot of them heavily depend on a singular mode of affective recognition, which within affective computing, and as I kind of got to explore more in different affective computing methodologies in different domains, multimodality is absolutely key. Multimodality allows for kind of the compensation for limitation within single modalities. It also kind of has this kind of like the whole is greater than the sum approach. It's not just about kind of um, adding up or summing up these different kind of modes or different kinds of streams of affective data, but in a way, the kind of the integration of them in some sort of let's say, for example, a dimensional approach, or a way to kind of integrate them and fuse these streams of data together allows for a more nuanced understanding of the affective state of that particular person. So multimodality is absolutely key. And as Rosalind Picard notes, human affect is inherently subtle and often expressed through a blend of signals rather than just isolated cues. So a president that actually attempted to do that and kind of integrated this multimodality in their approach is Wisteria, a shelter of the mind by Morphogenesis Lab, where basically they depended on a heart rate, GSR data, temperature data, as well as using an app for kind of self-reporting, which further kind of reinforced the different kind of affective states and the deductions being contextualized and being kind of nuanced compared to heavily depending on a singular mode. And here in this kind of research, they had these different kind of kinetic and space shifting entities with different lighting parameters that were also responding to it. But again, beyond just the kind of the actual manifestation or the design, it's more about having the kind of this multimodal approach to really influencing or starting to think about how it would influence our environments. The third kind of pillar that I set for perceptual empathy of the C framework is contextual attunement. And again, this is kind of based on Rosalind Pickard's and Grove's pivotal study actually in 2021 called Context and Automated Affect Recognition. And basically this is a readoption of it to fit within the kind of the spatial design paradigm. And for contextual attunement, basically it mentions certain elements to kind of be to try to integrate within the design of affective spatial environments. And with ambient sensory environment, basically it's looking at environmental stimuli beyond just the affective data, but what is the kind of the spatialized environmental condition that is happening alongside the kind of the experience of these different affective states, and integrating that within the deductions or the inferring of such affective states. Another important one is the situational constraints. So kind of like, what are the specific locations, specific activity, what is the nature of activity taking place, and what is the type of place? So as you would imagine, for example, in a house, if this was something kind of being experienced in one's kind of like private bedroom or something like a kitchen or a shared environment. So kind of contextualizing, again, the conditions around the experience of space is really important here, as well as the temporal dynamics. So really kind of underlining the inherent fluidity of the emotional states as they unfold across time, and emphasizing this trajectory of and rhythmic kind of ebb and flow of affective experiences, and they don't happen in kind of like discrete moments. So what is this kind of like temporal aspect that the system needs to kind of be kind of attuned to with the user or the occupants of the space. Lastly, personalization, and this kind of feeds into the interactional approach overall to see environments, which is basically embracing the unique emotional baselines and preferences and histories that define individual experience, and kind of resisting that logic of generic models that are just imposed, and kind of allowing for the occupants to have a more agency and more kind of a collaborative approach to the design and the experience of their spaces as well. So basically, this sums up the kind of the criteria for perceptual empathy, affective, all the modes of different affective recognition, but it's not just enough to kind of get this affective recognition. It's also about the multimodality and how these data fuses together, as well as kind of further layering it with this contextual attunement. Moving on to affective expressiveness, and with affective expressiveness, basically kind of building again upon the different kind of interactive design thinking and philosophies, and as well as methodologies. Again, in no way am I proposing a specific kind of design language or a specific design really, but these are more kind of like principles or elements to consider while looking at affective responsive environments. And one of them is kind of elastic boundaries, so kind of creating this flexible system that has some sort of openness that can kind of afford different kinds of expressive outputs that are affect driven, as well as familiar gestures. And familiar gestures here is actually kind of a key one. And Osman Haq in his in his subchapter Architecture, Interaction, and Systems in the interactive design book by Neil and Benaz Farahi, he actually gave this really kind of simple, but I thought was a really great kind of example of interaction. And basically, he told the story of this, or gave an example of this interacting with a kind of like an ATM machine and interacting with a bank teller. Obviously, in terms of kind of the spectrum of open-endedness or interactivity, the teller would be basically marked at a higher spectrum. However, if that teller, for example, kind of responds in a very unfamiliar or odd way, like they start screaming at you if you ask them a question, then although the interactivity kind of affordance is quite high in this kind of part of the spectrum, but it also needs to be some sort of like familiar gestures, like kind of the flexibility of a system is only kind of meaningful if the gestures that it creates are also within kind of the range of familiarity, and does not kind of alienate or overwhelm the occupant. So this is kind of something that I thought was also important to kind of take into consideration, as well as the temporal choreographies, which we kind of also kind of hinted upon in perceptual empathy. But here in terms of expressiveness, it's sometimes the system's kind of inaction, the deliberate pauses, for example, it can hold kind of certain meaning or certain kind of context sensitive timing that kind of speaks as loud or as expressive as, let's say, some sort of kind of a massive gesture of kinetic dynamic elements, for example. So kind of like having this, again, kind of attunement temporarily to the occupants of the space. And finally, the modalities cohesion, which is the unity of these expressive modalities, for example, whether it's whether it's kind of kinetic or in terms of flight or in terms of change of temperature or change of whatever it may be, kind of having some sort of cohesion where the expressiveness kind of is not defragmented, and again, not kind of a source of confusion or almost like frustration to the occupant. So yeah, and basically moving on to kind of the third principle here, which is the adaptive empathic intelligence, and this is more of kind of like kind of the embedded kind of thread here in this tapestry of this framework, and it focuses on the multimodality kind of capability, but as well as the ability to have raw data kind of be filtered, parsed, labeled, timestamped into meaningful sensed values, and these sensed values to then kind of have certain specialists or agents that are able to deduce or infer certain emotive or sentiments to them. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in terms of a specific platform that I tested on, and then basically kind of like the intelligence of C finds itself kind of needing to depend on some sort of also a centralized system that could have these fusion of beliefs, so that the affective center, which also takes into the other contextual kind of elements into consideration, can make basically a nuanced, kind of full-rounded inferring of the affective state. And finally, the socio-cultural resonance, which is kind of basically highlighting, what could it mean to have these effectively attuned environments, and how could they kind of shape our individual experience, but also our collective experience. What would it mean if these spaces could potentially also not just kind of infer a singular person affective state, but as a collective, and kind of, have this kind of almost like emotional map of the space of all of the occupants inside them, and how could that kind of basically affect our experience of that space and affect how we interact with one another. And an interesting project here, Ada by Jenny Sabine and Microsoft Research, actually attempted and actually fulfilled this kind of collective affective approach by basically having these different cameras around the building, which were able to pick up on the different facial expressions from all of basically the occupants of this Microsoft Research building, and correlating these inputs with different sentiment classifications as basically kind of a collective as a collective input, and in return having these different gradated lighting and spatial configuration and responsive materials that were interplaying by this kind of collective sentiment of the space. So it is quite kind of interesting to really kind of think about the impact of this, not on just a singular level, but how it could potentially impact the way we interact with one another and the way that we socialize with one another, specifically given, a space that could resonate with a collective or a collective of, with a collective of people in that specific space. Moving on finally to kind of the last element of this framework, which is the affective loop as the design workflow. So basically the affective loop starts with the affective recognition and all of the kind of the analysis to the response trigger to the different kind of behavior or morphology of that system. And as a way to kind of attempt to really look into what are the available tools that architects and creatives and designers could really kind of tap into and utilize also and merge with their kind of more familiar tools, I came across iMotions, and actually the way I came across about it was I was looking for a specific facial expression analysis module, and iMotions have really kind of monopolized the space of human behavior research in terms of acquiring all these different kinds of software components and models, and also being hardware agnostic. So they are able to collaborate and to work with all of these different kinds of biosensors and so on. So they basically are kind of heavily relied upon in a lot of industries in terms of research, and as well as kind of like practical applications as well. And the thing is about iMotions is that it allows this platform that already kind of facilitates this multimodal recognition strategy or approach, as it's already allowed to kind of speak to all of these different kinds of sensors, whichever sensor it may be, and kind of corrugate this all of the different kind of data streams into one platform. So last year, actually in 2023, I flew out there for one of their kind of academies to just learn more about this platform and how designers and architects and myself can kind of use it in terms of their research. And it was quite an interesting experience to be kind of like the only creative out of the group there. There were mainly psychiatrists, technologists, neuromarketeers. So it was really interesting to kind of see how different disciplines really kind of engage with it, and also like really heavily depend on this platform. That its strength really is its flexibility and adaptability, as well as kind of the multimodality of it as well, but also having these integrated and embedded models that are just kind of available to anyone to use without having the burden to kind of code it or interpret it from scratch. And a lot of these models have been heavily researched for decades and kind of built upon by large teams across decades. And now they are kind of like available for these people in different domains to really just make use of. So yeah, as I mentioned, like my kind of interest or the way I came about iMotions was actually I was looking for the Affectiva Affdex module, which is kind of one of the most comprehensive facial expression analysis models, and it was completely like acquired by iMotions, and there was no other way to like really kind of engage with it other than going through them. And in a way, I'm glad it kind of led me to iMotions, because the way they have positioned themselves within this kind of human behavior research is quite significant. And yeah. Yeah, so basically to kind of so one of my main goals when I was there in the academy is to actually just kind of try to figure out, first of all, try to get a better understanding of all the different hardware and the sensors there, which I got a chance to really like interface with them, really get a grasp of the different modules and the kind of the kind of uh, the the things that you can also deduce from them. But one of my kind of main concerns, well, or my main goals, was that I wanted to find a way to have this platform basically communicate to software that I was working on, and other designers and architects are also working on. And thankfully, iMotion software is also quite flexible in that sense, with its different event forwarding and event receiving capabilities. And through a simple UDP or TCP port of communication, you can establish basically and kind of exchange this different kind of effective data to any software, really. So I did basically a quick test to just kind of test out the connectivity or the communication between these two different software, here being Grasshopper, the other and iMotions, and having real-time data, post-process data to kind of be directly communicated and influencing this kind of simulated environment. And what's important here is also that the fact that you have the option to have these post-processed data. So with a lot of case studies that I've seen that have been interfacing with kind of affective design, their dependence on raw affective data is quite apparent. And in affective computing, raw data basically does not say much as basically having to, for example, with heart rate, there are kind of different metrics such as heart rate variability, and with these kind of metrics that these models that are integrated, for example, in eye motions and so on, then you can start making kind of these associations with or deductions about certain kind of psychological stress or arousal or and so on. So it's really important to kind of utilize these post-processed data and not purely the sensed affective raw data. Now, obviously, with my kind of experience there, it was really kind of clear to notice that a lot of the sensors are tethered and quite heavy and just are kind of intrusive. So this is definitely a challenge or limitations that within this kind of affective recognition is the portability and the intrusiveness of these sensors, and being able to have this kind of data in naturalistic kind of settings that is outside the traditional kind of lab research environments. Yeah, so this kind of wraps it up. So kind of as a conclusion, I would like to just basically kind of sum it up as a proposed framework for spatial design that redefines the relationship between interactive spatial design, technology, and human emotion, and basically incorporates and adopts these foundational concepts and methodologies from affective computing, interactive design, and trying to kind of realign them and reconcile them to envision a framework for a built environment that is an engaged collaborator in the lived experience that is aligned with the dynamics of its occupants. Not going to go through the objectives again. So some of the implications that I kind of see from from imagining such spaces is that basically, first of all, it situates emotions within the ecology of shared interactions, recognizing them also as contextualized and dynamically experienced through spaces. It also redefines the role of systems in affective interaction. Rather than purely decoding and transmitting emotions, it emphasizes on creating environments through an interactional approach that users can explore, interpret, and even reframe their emotional experiences and kind of have them actively shape their affective realities through these nuanced engagement with their surroundings. And lastly, basically, it proposes also a shift in design and evaluation of such systems, and basically design systems that are kind of inspired by this framework, prioritize the co-creation of emotional meaning. And really, I see the kind of the success of these systems to be measured by their capacity to nurture such empathetic engagement and self-awareness, and kind of this deeper attunement of affective states within the spatial environment. Now, obviously, this is kind of like scratching of the surface here. I most certainly see this work as just kind of starting and beginning, and not just by myself only, but also as a start to engage also in communication, collaboration with others that can basically start kind of looking at this overall framework and this kind of free thinking of effectively attuned environments. So most certainly looking forward to kind of expanding upon it, and I think in many ways it is quite open-ended at the moment, and can basically and it's left kind of intentionally open-ended and dynamic for kind of different collaborators to kind of go in. And it's just one thing that also is to be considered is that, for example, with the iMotions platform that I was kind of like dependent on in terms of exploration and kind of grasping effective processes, it is not open source. But even kind of back then, which was last year, you know, these things don't stay kind of closed for long. And actually, a couple of months ago, there was a new tool called Effect Toolbox, which is completely open source, that actually in many ways encompasses a lot of the functionalities that iMotions open. So I think as these different kind of accessible, user-friendly tools for kind of these effect recognition processes and methodologies are made available and made accessible, designers and architects and creatives will kind of not be intimidated to kind of engage within this domain and will have easier access. Obviously, also as kind of this kind of work and framework is find itself intertwined with the trajectory of sensing technologies and physical computing and smart materials. So as these kind of technologies are made, you know, to be kind of more ubiquitous and more embedded and kind of dissolve into the ambient fabric of everyday life, I see that such spaces could become even more and more kind of uh, present and feasible in many ways. Now, it's on a last note, it's also important to note that obviously with this kind of research or work, there is also an array of ethical questions that demand like further exploration in future works, and that's something I also wish to engage in to kind of you know, have this future kind of iterations of this framework addressing these challenges of ethical concerns. Yeah, so basically, just to kind of wrap it up, I see that kind of this work is really just like the beginning, and the framework is definitely an evolving one that would continuously kind of redefine itself through various collaborations. And yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I went over time.
Maybe we just turn your laptop around so you can hear my